Hello, everyone, and welcome to our most recent installment of Recycling in America. Today, we're going to be talking about PET, and we've got about 1,500 people registered for this. I see folks coming in. As you're coming in, why don't you go ahead and say hello in the chat? We're going to have an active look. Alexa's already got us started by saying hello from Detroit, people jumping in with where they're saying hello from. So I encourage you to do that too. I'll start by saying hello. I'm Keith Harrison. I'm the founder and CEO of the Recycling Partnership, and I'm calling in today from Lisbon, Portugal, where I am being a digital nomad today. And so lots of people coming in: Seattle, Syracuse, Nebraska, California, Alaska, UK. Great. I'm seeing really good folks all across many states and a couple continents. Uh, Today, all right, so Elise, I am not seeing the slides. How are those going? Let's see. Maybe I'll see to our speakers. Speakers, are you guys seeing the slides that are up
Yes.
now? Okay,
Yep.
then I'll assume that everybody else has them and I just am not catching them on my screen right now. So as everyone's coming in, I want to get us started by talking about our agenda for today. Today, we are digging into the topic of PET recycling. PET recycling has long been a success story. It very successfully accomplishes the recycling task of making sure that old stuff turns into new stuff. But the current global marketplace for PET recycling is at a crossroads and facing a few hiccups. So we're going to dig into that today. At the Recycling Partnership, we value having hard conversations, taking things head on, and doing them with honesty and clarity. So we've brought a number of experts today that we'll introduce to help us understand how to think about it. Today is a part one. What's going on? We're not going to jump into how do we solve it yet. We're going to understand what is the nature of the problem. Whenever you have a conversation about materials or what's happening with marketplaces and you have a big group like this, it's important to understand that the principles of antitrust. So on your screen now, you should see our antitrust reminder, which means that whenever we engage in a conversation about materials or marketplaces, we must never engage in talking about pricing. The rules are very specific when it comes to how you discuss these sort of things. And so we have legal counsel on with us to make sure that we never do anything to flirt with the legal rules around antitrust. With us today, we also have speakers from across the value chain who can help us understanding Kate from a recycler's point of view, Alistair's from a PET point of view. Molly's going to talk to us about PET from a brand point of view, and Chris is going to jump in wearing a couple hats. One, he's going to talk about the program he runs from a community point of view, and then we'll jump into it from a MRF point of view. He'll give some perspective from California too, since California is on a lot of people's minds right now. As I said at the beginning of this, I'm Keith Harrison, and I love hosting these webinars. We started the Recycling in America series last year because we wanted to make sure that we as a country were having good conversations about what's going on with recycling. And we break it down into where are we now, what's happening, what isn't working, and what do we do about it? So the Recycling Partnership is a 12-year-old national nonprofit, and we're focused entirely on driving recycling's toughest or solutions for recycling's toughest challenges. And we do that by having these sort of conversations. Now, the Q&A in the chat will be open today, and that is unusual, folks. Usually with a group this size, it looks like we've got about 600 participants on right now. It's just a one-way street. The speakers are speaking at you. But we, like I said, believe in having hard conversations about the world as it is and where do we want it to go. And you are an expert in your own space in this recycling world. And so we want to include you. So if you look to the bottom of your screen there are two features I want you to pay attention to. One is the Q&A. That is where you can put forward questions that will come to me so that I'll be able to see what sort of questions you want to put towards the speakers. The other one is the chat feature. That's where you're putting hello and where you're from. There, we've got some moderators who are going to help us facilitate a conversation with you. So these are four members, four leaders from the Recycling Partnership team: Chris, Adam, Kate, and Brittany. And Brittany are going to be in these four people are going to be in this space to help you answer questions like, what was that acronym? What was that number? To help you, if you're looking for, do we have data on that? Is there a report? To help give context to things as we're going along. So we invite you to be engaged, but we have some ground rules. The first is you must be respectful. At the Recycling Partnership, we're guided by our core values, and those are around honesty and respect. So you must also be respectful to our speakers and to each other. The second one is that you must be honest. No disinformation is allowed in the chat, and our speakers will, or our moderators will keep a look on that. And the third is no sales pitches. This is not a sales pitch for anyone. If you violate that, our monitors will follow it, and you might receive one warning, and then we'll just remove you from it. So a little tough love there, but that's how we create a safe space for all of us to have a conversation together. So with that, I think let's go ahead and dig in a little bit more. Elise, I think we're on slide 7 now. Elise is my partner on the slide changing, and I appreciate that. So the Recycling Partnership's a national nonprofit, and we work on solving recycling's toughest challenges together. And what that means is here at the 12-year mark, we've grown from an idea to more than $500 million worth of impact. So what that means is we work with companies, with communities, with MRFs, with the Pro, with NGOs, with everyone to try and really get to the heart of what's working, what's not, and what do we do about it. And in everything we do, we keep a focus on the 5 parts of a healthy system. Everybody loves the silver bullet. Unfortunately, they don't exist. So when we tackle hard challenges around recycling system, we like to think about, and we encourage everyone to adopt a really broad perspective of the US recycling system. One that starts with, how are things designed? Can they be designed is it going to work in the US recycling system? And then moves on to access, which means, can people recycle? Not everyone in this country even has the opportunity to recycle. So if something must be designed for it, access must be true, meaning can people recycle? Then the next thing is really around participation. If we keep moving around this dial, participation is the human part of this. If people can, do they? We need both of those. And the human spirit part of it is really tricky. The fourth part we think about really comes to the MRF and what happens in a MRF and the throughput of the MRF. If it enters the front door of a MRF and it gets separated out while it's in there, does it end in the right bale on the other side? And then the last piece is really all about end markets. And end markets are the place where recycling's official test comes true. If old stuff doesn't turn into new stuff, it's not recycling, it's collection. Old stuff turning into new stuff is the point when we secure the fate of a material, and it goes all the way through. So in all of our work of evaluating the US recycling system, writing the state of the recycling report, sharing data with many of you, we think about the 5 parts of a healthy system, and we'll talk about those today. And our speakers represent different parts of this today. All right, folks, so let's dig in a little bit onto this PET packaging. And I'll start by saying, a year ago, it never occurred to me that we would be having a conversation about the challenges of PET recycling. It is an iconic recyclable because it is so successfully recycled from old stuff to new stuff. The rates remain low, meaning we still have challenges around access and participation. But what we do know is that when the material gets in the bin, it all turns into a new thing, whether that's packaging, filling for my vest like this, carpeting, and others. So I'm why is PET, why has it been an iconically recyclable material? Elise, I'm going to hang out here on slide 10 for a second and just talk about it, the fact that PET recycling works. It is an effective industry, not by chance, not by luck, but by hard work. And NAPCOR is one of the groups that's on this conversation today. And NAPCOR really did the work decades ago to do everything from design to collection to MRF throughput to end markets to make sure that PET bottles were really recyclable. Here's a pop quiz for you. Anyone remember when PET bottles used to have the big black cap on the bottom? They don't now, in part because of NAPCOR's work. And one of my early mentors, Mike Shedler, was a leader at NAPCOR helping to make these changes. And so I'm thinking of him today, the base cup. Thanks, Steve Nevedo, for calling out the right term on that one. I can keep an eye on the chat, so I'm keeping up with some of the conversation that's coming through. I feel like a really good multitasker, by the way. So it never occurred to me that this would be a conversation that we would be having, not just in the US, but in the globe, about the challenges of the PET recycling system. And so that's why the Recycling Partnership wanted to host this very tricky conversation so that we can all understand what is the challenge. Does PET recycling work? Yes. Slide 11, Elise, on nearly 2 billion pounds of PET bottles see their successful way through recycling, and Alistair is going to give us more information on the details of PET recycling. But we have some challenge. The challenges start to come in to, why are we seeing this challenge now? Well, we see really inexpensive virgin material. We see an influx of imports. We see the closure of US recyclers because there's a lack of demand, meaning companies that are packaging in PET are increasingly using less North American sourced recycled content PET than they were. We have some import numbers here for you, where we've been tracking. We're working with others and our speakers today on tracking the change of imported material coming into the country from outside of North America. Today we'll talk about domestic and North American. We're going to think about that with Canada, US, and Mexico. And we see an influx in imported. While at the same time, 5 of the 30 major PET recyclers in the country have closed because that demand is low. So I'll come back to something I'm going to say over and over again. Recycling works when old stuff turns into new stuff. And that is what we're going to talk about today. How do we ensure that that continues to go forward? So with that, let me jump in and I'll ask my speakers to introduce themselves so you can hear who we have. We'll start off with Kate. Kate, why don't you say hello and give our audience a little bit of insight into who you are?
I'd be happy to. Thank you, Keith. And let me know. Oh, you can hear me. I see myself now too. Hello, everyone, and thank you to the Recycling Partnership for including me today. I'm Kate Eagles, Program Director for the Association of Plastic Recyclers. And for those who don't know us, the APR is an international nonprofit and the only North American organization focused exclusively on improving recycling for plastics. So our APR members include over 60 plastics reclaimers in the US and Canada. And these are the companies that wash and further process the approximately 5 billion pounds of plastic packaging collected annually in the US. Of these 60 plus reclaimer members, somewhere 23 to 25 are PET reclaimers that buy PET bales from material recovery facilities, MRFs, and bottle deposit programs across the US and Canada. And as Keith mentioned, we know recycling works because our members do it every day. And we're here because we are committed to recycling more and in the context of today to supporting our valuable PET reclaimers and recycling infrastructure. Personally, I have sort of reached the 20-year mark in the plastics recycling industry. And I've focused on recycling market analysis and development and market development in some capacity for most of those years for PET and other plastic resins. Thank you. I'll pass it on to the next.
Great. And I've seen a couple questions here. Will you get a recording of this? Yes. Are we showing slides right now? No. We're hearing from our speakers and we're going to have a debate. So we're going to be slideless for a while so we can all jump right in. So quick questions there. Kate, congrats on your 20th anniversary. I'm seeing some shout outs both for the anniversary and for your excellent last name of Eagles. So
Thank
go
you
Eagles.
for both.
All right, Alistair, how about you?
Yeah, great. Thank you. And again, to repeat what Kate said, thanks to Recycling Partnership for arranging this. And thanks for 1,500 people for registering. I realize that not everybody is on, but it really puts in perspective just how important this topic is to an awful lot of people. So it makes us want to work even harder to try and understand it, resolve it, and come up with some good ideas. So I'm Alistair Carmichael. I'm from NAPCOR, which is the National Association for PET Container Resources. So PET is our total focus. We cover the whole chain. We have members who are suppliers of the raw materials for PET, for virgin PET. We have the virgin PET resin producers. We have the PET recyclers, from the reclaimers through to the processors called the converters who go from flake to pellet. We have the bottle producers, we have thermoform producers, and we have the supply chain, or the support industry, let's say. We have the machinery people, the additives, all the various people that go to make the PET business what it is. So we're very specialist. We're nothing like as big in terms of membership as APR, but we are very focused on the PET side. I don't know how many decades I should claim if Kate's getting congratulated for 20 years. I'm afraid I've been in an awful long time in the business. I've lost the slides actually. Anyway, I've been involved in the PET and the polyester chain for over 5 decades. Let's leave it at that. And I have had the benefit of living in the US for the most part of my life, but also lived in Asia, lived in Europe, and been involved, as I say, at both the textile level and at the packaging level. I joined NAPCOR in 2018. I actually followed Kate. Kate was moving on from NAPCOR to APR, and I stepped into what Kate had been doing. So this is a nice full circle situation. I'm based in South Carolina, where we've been very cold recently, unseasonably so, but we're hopeful that spring is here and things are going to get a little bit warmer.
Well,
So
very
I'll
good.
pass on. Yeah.
And I think that I'm saying that, Alistair, I hear that you're a PT rock star. That's what the chat is saying. So well to that. Molly, why don't you say hello and introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi. Yeah. Thanks for having me. My name's Molly Laverty. I work for Primo Brands, which is a company name you might not know from our corporate entity, but probably do recognize us from our portfolio of packaged branded water and beverages. These include brands like regional spring water brands like Poland Spring, or nationwide purified brands like Pure Life, um, as well as our Primo Water brand. I serve as the Director of Sustainability Reporting and Engagement, and one of my primary directives is around our strategy around circularity. I'm newer to Primo Brands, but not to the role of corporate sustainability. I've spent about 15 years in various CPG roles, focusing on sustainability for brands at the corporate level.
Very good, Molly. Welcome. And last but not least, Chris.
Oh, I'm not muted. Sorry. Hi, everyone. My name is Chris Laughter. I'm a senior sustainability specialist with the San Mateo County Sustainability Department. I'm also president of the board of the Northern California Recycling Association. And I bring up both organizations because how I approach and how I think about PET differs slightly between the two. So here in San Mateo County, we have 21 jurisdictions. So one of them is the unincorporated county whom I work for, but we also have 20 incorporated cities and towns. And between those 21 jurisdictions, seven haulers are operating. We have four MRFs that those haulers are taking material to. And we also have a self-hauling MRF that residents of the coastside community, the more rural area of the county, like self-haul their materials to. And our primary role, the sustainability department's primary role in all that is to provide education and resources to residents and commercial businesses so they know like what is recyclable and where it's recyclable. And how to engage like in like proper sorting. And I also run and implement the county's disposable food serviceware ordinance, which prohibits the use of single-use plastic materials for foodware because once PET foodware, other plastic foodware, it's very hard, if not impossible, to recycle once it's been used. And so to kind of reduce contamination, reduce what's going to a landfill, we have some requirements for foodware. And then my other hat is with the Northern California Recycling Association, which is a 501c6 nonprofit industry trade organization, mostly made up of haulers, recyclers, local governments, community-based like advocates here in Northern California, mostly centered around the San Francisco Bay Area, who advocate for zero waste. So, recycling does a lot for us. There are also some problems with recycling, and our kind of stance is, well, if we have less material that we need to manage, then we're going to improve our recycling efforts, right? So a world without waste is like our mission. And so my interest in this conversation today is to think about how we can engender public trust in our recycling systems, but also use less resources upstream.
Love that, Chris. And some shout outs to our NorCal. I also say that when I started the recycling partnership, I lived in Chris's County right there in Half Moon Bay. And Chris Worth on our team also lives in San Mateo County. So it's like the vortex of all of this. So thank you. All right. Other shout outs of San Mateo going on, but let's get started in the details here. So folks, remember, you can use the chat to share with each other, get into discussion. Use that Q&A for deeper dive questions that it looks like Brittany and Adam are already jumping in to answer some questions. And I'll be going through there to pull them into the speakers as we're going to. So jumping right in, Kate, kick us off. You represent the recyclers, so give us a lay of the land. What's going on in the PET markets? Why did 5 close? What is this looking like? Lay it all out for us.
Great, I'd be happy to. So just for context, and I think you covered some of this, Keith, but PET plastic is very successfully recycled. More PET plastic is recycled than any other resin, and this is true in North America and globally. And as you mentioned, Keith, and Alistair may touch on, we recover about close to 2 billion pounds of PET annually. And it may surprise folks to know that most of this recycled PET goes back into bottles and other PET packaging. So PET containers are also recycled back into polyester, carpet, and fiber, but this is a much smaller market share than PET bottles and packaging. So just good to know. And this all happens through the 23 plus reclaimer, 25, depending on how you count them, locations in the US and Canada that I mentioned previously in my introduction that wash and further process the PET we collect. And we also now have 5 states that require recycled PET in beverage bottles. So we know how to recycle PET containers and we do it well. We're good at it. We have mandatory recycled content requirements in these 5 states and other voluntary commitments. And yet we've seen the recent closure of 5 reclaimers, as Keith noted. So what's happening here? So a couple contributing factors from our point of view at APR. Well, companies have started sourcing imported recycled PET to meet their state recycling requirements or other commitments. And now, nearly 25% of recycled PET is estimated to be sourced from overseas, and that undermines U.S. programs, frankly. Second, there's a lot of inexpensive virgin plastic on the market. So many companies have stopped using recycled PET or are using less because virgin PET is so inexpensive. And I think, Keith, you touched on this. Recycled markets do have cycles like other commodities. And I was just talking about this yesterday. Over 20 years, we've seen these cycles. But I think the concern for our PET reclaimers at the moment is that this is not just a cycle, it's a new landscape. And this is why
Mm.
we're here today, right? So, a couple things that PET recyclers would like to see, if I'm not ahead of myself, Keith,
No, jump right
is
in.
commitment to buy from U.S. programs. So our recyclers pay U.S. wages and comply with U.S. regulations, and we're seeing companies use imported rPET from countries like Taiwan, Thailand, Vietnam because it's cheaper. And so we really need to support our U.S. and North American systems, and that may include contracts. In other words, anything that establishes commitment is important. I think we'll revisit contracts again later, so I won't go
We
too
will.
much
Yeah.
further here. We need more states to require rPET and higher penalties. rPET being my shorthand for recycled PET.
Mm.
I mentioned the 5 states with laws in effect are coming in, but we hear from members that some brands just pay the fines and don't buy the recycled PET. So this is exacerbates. And the third thing I'll mention right now is more high quality supply. And this may seem counterintuitive, but we're talking demand, right? And let's be clear on this. If you put your PET bottle in your recycling bin, it will absolutely be recycled. No issue here. But we only recover about 30% of US bottles right now. We could do better. And it's urgent that we take action on demand. We're talking about that now. But more high quality supply of PET collected for recycling is also really essential if we're going to scale PET recycling, right? And ensure that we're able to meet North American buyer recycled PET needs with North American recycled PET supply. So if we're going to scale, we really need to focus on demand. We're here to talk about that today, but we also need commensurate supply and to improve our high quality collection of PET. I'll leave it there for now, but I'm sure we'll come
That
back to these
that sounds
themes.
good. And I
Yeah.
think we are going to get into contracts. We're going to get into SB 54 in California. We're going to get into what about deposit stuff, all the things to drill into. So I think that's the lay of the land. But from a recycling point of view, now Alistair is going to click it down even more to a PET specific experience since you're the PET rock star. So let's click down a step more.
No pressure. Yeah, so just to sort of lay out how we keep in touch with the market and how we try and stay abreast and take actions to move. Obviously, as I said in the introduction, we're relatively small, but we're very focused. So all our members have basically similar interests, although when you start talking about imports, then we can get into areas where some members have much more interest in receiving imports and others are less keen on imports. So there are areas where we have to walk a fairly fine line. But certainly the resources that we have to monitor what is happening in the industry are excellent because it's the guys who are out there at the front line who are facing these issues on a daily basis. We and I know we said at the beginning we don't talk prices, and I'm not going to talk specific prices, but that's an important factor in what we do and how we monitor the market. We monitor always looking in the rearview mirror. We're always looking back a month at prices, so there's no question of us leading markets. But we do monitor very carefully what's happening. And I think just as an indication of how difficult the market is right now, and Chris will know this all too well, but a bale of PET is now as cheap as it's ever been. I went back and it was 2000, it's 20, just over 20 years that we were at these levels ago, that we were at these levels. And as we all know, costs have gone up, operation costs have gone up tremendously in that period. And yet that's what a bale is costing today. And right now in January of this year, things are not moving. It's still a very, very difficult market. East Coast curbside and West Coast curbside and West Coast deposits are all tough. And this really comes down to the demand question that Keith and Kate have both talked about. The difficulty is demand. And that is certainly being heavily influenced by the uh, influx of imported rPET, but also by the um, the commitments that were made, and I think the commitments that were made that led to quite a number of the investments are not all being followed up on, and certainly not being followed up on with domestic supply, and that's why we have seen this this loss of capacity. Um, just to put it a little bit in perspective, we have lost 5 plants in the last 12 months. The fifth one is supposed to close actually in March this year. But over the 12-month period, it is 5 plants who have closed some part of their operation. We as NAPCOR, we measure capacity based on the bottles in. And the first thing that those bottles see, apart from the bale opening, is washing. So we measure the wash capacity, and so we have seen 5 plants close wash capacity. We've also seen 2 new plants start up in 2025. So it's not all doom and gloom. We have had 2 new plants start up, and of the 5 plants that have closed, 2 of them are going to continue in operation going from flake, which is the output from the wash and grind process. They will be operating from flake to pellet, which is what is then sold mainly to the bottle manufacturer. So it's not total closures and it's not total bad news, but it certainly is not good news right now
It's,
where we are.
So, Alistair and Kate, before we go on, I'm seeing some questions from people of, wait a minute, can you give us any sort of ranges of what stuff turns into, if old stuff turns to new stuff, how much is going back to bottles versus carpeting versus,
Yeah,
can you give us some examples? And then Adam, I see you might be jumping into some of the questions there too, but maybe if we pop in a link to NAPCOR's reports or any of the reports, we can make sure people have the details too. But
yeah.
more color.
It's a real interesting picture and a great question because the the 2015, 14, and before, the dominant end use for bottles was textiles. Some of it was carpet, some of it was the filling for your vest and pillows and comforters and all that sort of thing. That business really took a hammering in the US over COVID, and demand dropped. That probably in 2015, that was probably about close to 60% of the demand for PET, for rPET. And that actually was the time that I joined, and that was really what I was bringing into NAPCOR was the textile side. So as that business or that end use dropped, so the end use into bottles picked up. And it's actually it was a very timely chart because we were gaining a little bit of capacity. We weren't gaining that much, but the two lines of demand really crossed as textile went down, packaging went up, and bottles, including food and non-food bottles, are now over 60% of all the rPET consumption in the US.
Yeah. Okay. Kate, anything to add to that?
No, and sheet is in there too. So all packaging is probably over 60%, right,
Yeah,
Alistair? And carpet and fiber much lower. Strapping is still a market, but much reduced market. And those are pretty much the markets, right? New packaging, mainly
yeah,
bottles, carpet fiber and other textile fibers, and a little bit to strapping and other specialty, but that's pretty much it.
right,
Yeah.
right.
Okay. Very helpful. So I think then we're starting high and clicking down low. So let's take it one step further and let's get talking about an example of end markets that are putting it to work. And let's look to you, Molly. Molly Primo has made commitments to using North American source supply, and this is a brand differentiator for you. Talk a little bit about that process, how you got there, what you're thinking, what you're seeing. Can you talk about that a little more?
Yeah, I think, overall our commitment is to using recycled content, as we've talked about. PET is something that we can reincorporate. We can look at a bottle to bottle system as we're incorporating rPET into our packaging. We do have aggressive corporate goals around recycled content, which rely very heavily on using rPET as it's one of the main packaging elements that we're sourcing. For us, looking at long-term contracts with suppliers is really important so that we don't lose access to the rPET supply in what's becoming a very competitive market. You know, we've seen reclaimers shut down and tightening up the supply. In many cases, the ambition to use more rPET outpaces the available volume of high quality material. Our operations do see operational issues with rPET of different qualities and how it performs and how we're incorporating it as we make new bottles. The long-term contracts also provide the commitments to the suppliers that they need to build out the capacity to meet this demand. So it's really both levers. It's companies making the commitments to sourcing rPET that are allowing the manufacturers of rPET to invest and to continue to produce rPET in the domestic supply.
Yeah. Okay, so a commitment to recycled content, a prioritization of North American, some questions about quality, which is a price thing, right? It's not a technical challenge of can it compete? It's how do you get it to compete at the price? And I see Kate looking here too. So how do we do that? And then, that's kind of where the long-term contracts come in. So we're definitely going to dig in there of this is a business that needs to be invested in. I think, Molly, you're a company that we work with at the Recycling Partnership. So we work with a lot of companies, and I see a couple questions of, is the partnership working with brands to use more recycled content? And the answer is absolutely yes. 5 parts of a healthy system means the old stuff has to go to new stuff. And so we spend a lot of times working with companies to talk about how to look for opportunities to expand, not just for PET, but across all materials, not just plastic, across all the materials, because it's really the company's use that ties the bow and starts the system all over again, right, Molly?
Yeah, and I think it's important to note too, we've been talking about the difference between imported and domestic supply. I think it's important to touch on that the global supply chain is very interconnected. So even resin that we're seeing that is made or pelletized domestically could be relying on imported feedstock. So it's introducing a level of complexity for procurement, for traceability, making public claims about where you're sourcing your rPET from is becoming more and more complex as we're seeing the market and the dynamic shift.
So that's a good time to talk about this market and dynamic shift. So Chris, why don't you tell us a little bit about that? And you've said you'd be having 3 hats on. Let's start first with community and then we'll hear from Murph. How about that?
Yeah, 3 hats. It's a party over here on my end. So I'm sorry, you wanted me to start with the community?
Sure, that'd be great.
Yeah. So I think that, from our end, what we're most concerned about, as I said, like in my intro, is engendering public trust, like in our recycling systems. I think that, when it comes to the downstream challenges, which include, as has been talked about by fellow panelists, you have a diminishing value of PET bales. You have dwindling markets. And I think that goes hand in hand, at least in part, with a drop in public trust, right? It's been brought up that the cost of recycling MRF operations has gone up. And I think it's important to kind of take a step back and think about like how we got to this in the first place, right? So like our residents, our commercial businesses are just inundated with all kinds of different plastic materials, right? 1 through 7. It's just everywhere in life. It's in food service, it's in the products that we buy, it's in every choice we make. Plastic is involved, and that means that people are not going to know how to like recycle and sort like properly. What's recyclable, what's not. They hear about items like being like landfilled and such. And I think they just like lose faith like in it.
Yeah.
And it's in part because like the plastic industry in general has like made it our responsibility, local government, waste haulers to manage the material that they're profiting off of, right? And um, people have come to believe that anything with a chasing arrow symbol on it is recyclable. And so all this material is being given to our haulers to manage when they don't have the capacity to do that, right? And so like it's expensive for operations because you have to sort everything to get to the stuff that's actually you can make money off of. And contamination rates like drop down like the value of that. So I think in order to get to a place where we can have public trust like in our systems, I think a couple of things need to happen. I think we need to, I don't want to say pivot away, but I think we need to expand beyond like simply what is it recyclable and where. Like my colleagues have like developed, or you can't really say it, like it's a very beautiful like recycling guide. This isn't useful for those who aren't in San Mateo County. Sorry, but I just wanted to show that, like we put a lot of thought and effort into guiding people into like, hey, if you've used this and you dispose of it, this is where you can take it. Or these are the curbside businesses that can collect this for you. But I think we need to also, let them know what recycling actually looks like. Like a bottle doesn't become a bottle necessarily. It probably becomes parquet, or carpet, not parquet, carpet, or like fill in for like the jacket like I'm wearing. This is from recycled plastic. And I think we also need to invest in domestic markets. So in California, we have a law that in order to reduce carbon emissions in the atmosphere, we are creating an in-market for compost. So we take organics that would go into like landfill or may go into like landfill, and we put them into like an organic stream, and we create compost, and then we require local jurisdictions to buy that compost and apply it. So we're doing two things. We're driving up feedstock, volume of feedstock, and then we're forcing up demand. And I think something similar, may need to happen for the PT industry, where we're requiring local jurisdictions to procure recycled, not maybe local jurisdictions, maybe that's a bad example, but, require like the procurement of like domestically produced like PET or something. So.
I think that's good. And I think the conversation about the supply and demand piece is that compost example is a good one. It's a little more complicated because you control that market. This is a free market. So questions about quality are coming through. Kate, I'm going to bring those back to you. Once we get back to you, I want to talk about contracts. Why don't you also talk about quality, what makes good material. But to set us up for that, Chris, why don't you talk about it a little bit more then from a MRF perspective? Not just from the community. What about a MRF?
Happily. I am in preparation so we have 7 haulers, as I mentioned, with 4 MRFs, 1 self-hauling MRF. So I talked to several of them in preparation for this talk today to best like represent like their point of view. And everyone agreed that PET it's a reliable plastic to sell. There's a healthy market for it, ish. But I think that its success depends on market stability, right? And market stability depends on the material quality, contamination levels, and as we've discussed already, like the price of domestically produced like recycled feedstock against subsidized virgin feedstock or imported like feedstock. And they collect PET in basically one of 2 ways. So we have 2 different types of PET that our haulers and MRFs deal with. Like grade A, the like injection molded like bottles, which have stable value, have a CRV value, so like they're high value, and we have an in market for them. Although it's dwindling, there's an in market. And then there's like thermoforms. So a less quality form of plastic, a very widely used form of plastic, one that often has a lot of contamination like in the streams. And that often does not have an in market. And if material is sitting at a facility for too long and it's not being sold, well, then it's just landfill, right? And so that's where public mistrust like comes in, right? When they hear about like things like thermoforms, like going into landfill. And MRFs generally like do 2 things with that material. Either they sort like both grade A and grade B into like one bale, into a single like grade, and then they may have a difficult time finding a buyer because it's mixed. And if they do find a buyer because it's mixed, its value is low, or they separate it, and then they're able to sell off like the bottles but they're not able to sell off or have a difficult time selling off the thermoforms. And so
Mm.
again, we're back to like landfill as a solution because it can't sit in that area for too long. And then they have a
So
difficult
you've got to be
time.
able to collect it, you need to sort it, you need to be able to move it quickly to a market that
Yes,
will pay for it. That
right.
there's a separation between thermoforms and bottles at your MRF. I think Kate will
Yeah,
talk, that's every MRF's a little different, but
right.
that's the process we're seeing that you're navigating.
Yes, yes, yes.
Uh-huh.
And then on top of that, as it's been already been pointed out, even if that goes smoothly, you're still facing like dwindling markets, right? So like here in California, not too long ago, a plant closed, flooded the market, dropped the value of PET. It went from something like 12 to 15 cents a bale or a pound to like 2 cents a pound. And that's been very hard on our facilities, right? In part also because the expense of having to filter out the sellable material is so high because there's so
Yeah.
much they have to like sift through. And they I think reiterated the need for the creation of a strong like domestic market in order to like keep the PET market that we have here in California like afloat.
And I want to point out there's a lot of questions about deposits. California
Yeah.
is a deposit state. So we're still
Yes.
talking about the MRF having to do this work with deposits. So it's not a
Yes.
slam dunk. There's no
Right.
silver bullets, back to
Right.
that. And there's a lot of levers. So,
Right.
hey,
A lot of the issues, Keith,
yeah,
that are coming up from Chris's situation is the thermoform, which of course is not deposit.
Yeah.
So
Right.
California, by nature, in the MRF supplied product, gets a much higher percentage of thermoforms than many states where there are not deposits. The thermoforms tend to get absorbed into those non-deposit states more easily because they become a much less percent. Most reclaimers, and I hate to think what's going to happen on the chat box right now, but most reclaimers can sort of live with 12% um, thermoform content in
no,
a bale. I mean,
mm-hmm.
obviously, some can buy 100% thermoform content in bales if they've got specific end uses. And that is, I guess, one of the disadvantages of a deposit state because you end up with all the thermoforms going into the curbside chain because there is no deposit
Mm-hmm.
requirement there. And all the bottles, not all the bottles, but a high percentage of the bottles go into the deposit chain. So Chris gets a much higher concentration of
Yeah.
thermoforms in his PET supply.
Yeah, Catherine was just putting that into the chat too. So we're seeing that coming through. So it's not an easy answer. We've got to be able to move many materials. Kate, I think you were going to talk a little bit about contracts and the role of contracts in moving the material.
Sure, and I just want to go back to because I think Chris and Molly, you had sort of two ends of the spectrum, and I think this is so important to stay focused on. Chris is saying if we don't move material, we lose consumer confidence, and Molly was expressing the fact that brands look at this globally. I think we can't look at this globally right now. We really have to look at this much more locally, or our system is not going to succeed. And I think that's so important. And I know there are cost concerns and things like that, but it's so important to stay focused on that one message. Contracts are the best indication of commitment that we have. We see them in Murph and Holler systems in maybe a 7 to 10 year contract to service a community, and they are important because they allow for investment and other things to, equipment investment to run a recycling program. We don't see so much or have not seen that so much in recycling. We definitely have some PET contracts, but they tend to be maybe a year or so, or maybe no contract at all. And industry relationships have been super, super important. But you can't show a relationship to your bank to get an equipment loan or other asset loans to really improve or to convince investors that you have what it takes to invest. And I think we need to stay globally competitive. We need
Yeah.
to put equipment in that will keep us globally competitive. We need to scale this market, and we need the confidence to be there to do so. And so, for want of a better mechanism, contracts are something we think are important to look at because we really need to sort of dig in here and dig in here pretty quickly in this industry for PET to really
Critic critically. This is not like a let's figure it out over the next year and a half. This is a let's move this right now. And I think this gets to one of the questions that's coming up, Kate, in this of like, wait a minute, California is going to have EPR. You know, we've got Chris from California. Won't EPR take care of this? No, EPR
No.
is a supply mechanism, meaning it gets it out of the house and into the MRF. The MRF, whether it's in an EPR state or not, still has to have some company that's going to turn the old stuff to the new stuff. That's the end market thing. So that's why the contracts are important, whether it's an EPR state, deposit state, or any other state, which are very nice states too, right?
Absolutely. Agreed. We would say EPR because it's a supply driver, and we've seen this in Europe. We know this is true. It's not a demand driver. You need to pair it with demand drivers, and our best option for that is required recycled content commitments, as we see in 5 states, having to use recycled content, ideally incentivizing that to be North American. I mean, that's how it's really going to work, right? As I said, we have to start buying locally in our communities, in our Americas, or we're not going to have a workable system, right?
Right.
Um,
Circularity struggles if the supply chain starts 8,000 miles away.
And
It
we're
is
investing in our systems here too. We're
That's right.
investing in
It is
MRFs like Chris.
very difficult
Yeah.
to make a real circularity claim if you are bringing, and I'll use Vietnam. It's not nothing special about Vietnam, but or any Asian country is taking part of their product bottles, which could be circularized within their own country, but they're taking the rPET from those bottles and exporting it to the US. And at the same time, they're taking market away from the domestic producer in the US. That is not a circular system.
Yeah, the carbon impact of that, and people in the chat are also raising, what about human rights? There's a carbon impact. What's about the human rights piece? But let's make sure that we are thinking about. I'm going through my list of questions. We've addressed deposits. We've addressed contracts. I don't think we quite got to the quality though. I think people are still wanting to know like what if the concern from brands is we'd like to use it, but we can't get the quality at the price, right? Can you pull that up? Maybe Molly, if you can speak to that a little bit more of like why is that a challenge and help us
Yeah.
understand.
Yeah, and this will be only from our perspective and what we make. I think there's a lot of different applications of rPET across the CPG industry. But in our use case, rPET can behave really differently than virgin PET in the manufacturing process. So things like efficiency, how fast we can run a line, differs with the amount of recycled content that we're using. We see differences in our scrap rates, especially with bales coming in. We love bales and bottle bill deposit states. They're very clean, they're very consistent. Um, Operates almost similarly to virgin PET versus other states where the supply can be contaminated. We do see increase in scrap rates. Holes in a bottle, makes the whole process go a little bit slower. And then the last consideration is the final color and appearance of the bottle. So incorporating more recycled plastic does change the color of a PET bottle in a way that consumers are not always willing to accept. So that's something we have to keep in mind as well, is what does it look like at the end, as well as all the considerations of how you get to the end bottle.
Anyone else use that as a party trick? If people are asking if things really get recyclable, I show them a Hellman's mayonnaise or a water bottle, and you can say, see how it's a little gray up here at the neck? That means it's recycled content. I feel like I use that at book club. How about you, Molly?
Somebody posted
Definitely.
in the chat about Ice River in Canada, and I couldn't read everything that was said, but that's a great example. I mean, Ice River have been doing 100% rPET bottles for I think it's 14 years now, and they have never had to reject a bottle for quality. Sure, for color, but they have branded the color as a benefit. And it's basically, look, yeah, our bottles are a bit gray. That's because we use 100% recycled. Now, I'm not suggesting that, Molly, that's a tactic that everyone would use, but it's a fairly effective acceptance of what they are seeing and the fact they're 100%. It's it's a great story. And for the people in the chat who've been asking, I keep hearing that bottles degrade, PET degrades each time you reprocess it. 14 years, they've never had to reject a bottle for quality.
Okay.
And
I'm sorry.
real world.
Real world. So is it doable? Yes. Does it take commitment? Yes. Does it take a lot of work? Yes. And I think that's certainly what the recycling partnership is advocating for, is that, look, this is a successful story that we've been working to grow. This backslide is completely preventable, but it's going to need to take work. I have one question for the group. We will end on time. We've got 4.5 minutes left. I have a question for the group. I'm going to ask for a volunteer, and then we're going to close everyone with, I want to recap some themes and then one call to action from our speakers. So one of the questions that's coming up is around legal concerns about collaboratives, voluntary commitments. We're seeing some pressure from, for instance, the Florida Attorney General in coordinated practices. When what we're trying to see is success stories. I could use one volunteer who'd be up for talking about how do we navigate a tricky legal landscape at the same time we're trying to make real progressive change. Any takers?
That's a tough one. I
have an idea. I think we
I
have to
have
do
no
it I would say that's what we're doing here, right? This is why the recycling partnership is leaning forward and having this sort of transparent conversation about what is the challenge, what does good look like, and what do we get there? Because when I think transparency, data, honesty is a light that shines through concerns and prevents concerns around collusion or antitrust, which are true legal rules that we must abide by, and why Molly, our attorney, is on this meeting right now. But I think we lean forward in having the conversation as a group with each other to push and pull. So that's my recommendation on that one. And I see Lee is calling from Portugal. So hello, also from Portugal. All right, folks, we're gonna wrap this one up on time. Hey, Elise, can I help get the slides back up? Great. So folks, I'm going to end with the speakers. I'm going to go through the order that I started to a one sentence takeaway of what's their call to action. But here's what I'm hearing. The PT recycling system is proven, it's effective, but it's at a pivotal moment where it must scale, not stall. That's what the partnership is working with everyone, including our brand partners. The data is clear. The reclaimer capacity in the US is in decline. Imports are on the rise. That's not the direction that will solve it. The risks are real. It's escalating quickly, but we can turn this around. We can change this and keep the US recycling rates viable. EPR won't do it alone. It is a critical supply mechanism. Demand comes when companies buy stuff and old stuff turns to new stuff. So that is my call to action. And we'll go through on our closing line. Kate, kick us off. What's your one takeaway, one sentence for the members?
Okay, one sentence. Policymakers, more plastic, post-consumer recycled content laws with North American incentives. Companies, work toward stopping buying rPET from overseas, buy North American. Cities and states, use your procurement guidelines to require North American content. That's me. Thank you.
That is a good run-on sentence. I love it. So policymakers use this stuff and continue. All right, Alistair, what's yours?
Ditto to Kate. And she got all the points that I'd got written down to put in there.
Even better, very succinct. Molly, what's on your mind?
I'd say that rPET sourcing, it's not just a materials challenge, but a systems challenge. So while, brands need to make commitments, we also need to be working in coordination with recyclers, suppliers, policymakers, consumers, all working towards a same common goal.
Common goal. Thank you, Molly. And Chris, bring us home.
Sure thing. I advocate for reuse. If we're reusing items instead of using single-use items, that we're not creating material that needs to be managed. And if we're not having to manage as much material, then we're not going to deal with it. It's going to be easier to deal with the problems that we do have, and we're going to engender public trust. in our
The best
systems.
thing to do is not make it in the first place if you don't need it. Reuse it if you can, and then make sure that the recycling is happening thoroughly for the public trust. So right on, Chris. Elise, why don't we show this last slide? Attendees, thank you for joining us for this hour. Please join me in thanking Kate, Chris, Alistair, and Molly for their rapid fire conversation here. We did not get through all the questions, even with people typing madly away. So scan here to keep in touch with us. Let us know what else you'd like to hear about. I think it sounds like we should keep this conversation going with another webinar. So pop that in the chat before you sign off here. And again, thank you for joining us in Recycling in America. What works, what doesn't, and what are we doing about it? PET style. Thanks, speakers.
Thanks, Keith.
All right.
Thank you
Take
so much.
care,
That was lovely.
everyone.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.